Hello everyone. Today I would like to share with you a story of a guy named Edward Bernays and how he has manipulated you even though he's been dead for 30 years and you probably haven't heard of his name before. After I tell this story, I would like to also, just leave you with some basic principles and some of my thoughts on how we can appropriately and probably in a healthy way respond to the world he created. So, basic facts about him. He was born in 1891 in Austria, actually. His family then moved pretty much right after, I think he was like a year old, to the United States. And he lived the rest of his life here in the United States, primarily in New York, working mostly from there. He was the nephew of Sigmund Freud. And it was one of the main reasons that Freud became, I would say, famous outside of academic circles, utilizing a lot of the stuff that Freud developed with psychotherapy. Most of his notable work started, I would say, during and after the First World War, where propaganda was probably the first time it was widely used for kind of any human endeavor on both sides of the war, actually. And the issue that they were dealing with during the war and as they were ramping down and after the war was almost about to be over, a lot of companies in the United States were wondering how they could maintain sales without a war going on. As most people know, a war tends to ask for a lot of products, and if you're a company providing those products, it's a very lucrative. And a lot of companies were very concerned that they wouldn't be able to maintain the sales that they had, and they were looking at different ways in how to basically manipulate the market the best they could to, maintain their sales and keep their market share, right? So it was kind of during this period and after World War I that he realized, in his own words, that he decided that if you could use propaganda, right, for war, you could certainly use it for peace. His core concept that he developed over the years, and this dude had a long career. I mean, he died in 95 and he was pretty active even after retirement. So, he had a long run, but one of the main core concepts that he developed over time was this idea called engineering of consent. Okay. And it was utilizing a lot of the same theories that his uncle Sigmund Freud had developed over the years with psychoanalysis. As time went on, and I think it was specifically after World War II, the public perception of the word propaganda it developed a negative connotation to it, right? So he rebranded and started calling his work public relations. And if you've ever dealt with any type of big company anywhere, you're probably dealing with some sort of arm of their public relations. So I would like to share with you 3 quotes from him out of this book called Propaganda. And I think it gives you a good idea of his thought process in a bite size. I mean, I could spend hours going into his worldview and how he viewed the world, but I don't have that kind of time. So let's just kind of look at some of these basic points he made. First quote: "The conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in a democratic society." So you see there's a view there where he's trying to look at the world and go, okay, how can we not have world wars, right? Or how can we make it so companies have more sales in a specific way, right? He started seeing that basic propaganda was going to be in his mind, a linchpin to maintaining peace and order in the world as they knew it back then, right? Those who manipulate this unseen mechanism of society constitute, this is the second quote, an invisible government, which is the true ruling power of our country. Kind of sounded some kind of similar, huh? To certain things we've all experienced in the last 5 years. Third quote, we are governed, our minds are molded, our tastes formed, our ideas suggested, largely by men we have never heard of. So, again, he wanted to be, I think, like in many ways, his idea was that he wanted to be one of the unseen movers, right, in society. And there's tons of people like that in our modern world. And in many ways, he brought an intellectual background to, what rulers and people in all through history have tried to do. But the different flavor is that we're dealing with a world of billions at this point when he was starting his work and now, and trying to manipulate the masses is just, it's par for the course now. And he kind of got that rolling. So the question is, right, was it effective, right? Was it effective? I think you can already see where I'm going with this, but let's look at some of the specific stories that I think give some light to kind of the proof of the pudding that he had going on there. So to give you background on this, back in the 1920s, it was very common for men to smoke, but it was pretty much taboo for women to smoke back in the day. And this a tobacco company called Lucky Strike approached Bernays, going like, okay, what can you offer us here? We're dealing with this fact that most women and most men think that smoking is not for females, right? And they're saying like we're missing out on half of the population. 50% of the market share is not smoking right now. So is there something you can do about it? Well, Bernays asked them if he could take some money and go to what was one of the first psychoanalysts in the United States at the time, direct disciple of his uncle, Sigmund Freud, and just approach him with this question, like, how can we use psychoanalysis, right? Or what can we use to basically get this segment of the population to start smoking, right? When I was researching this, it seems like there's different ways that this was presented on what this guy actually ended up telling Bernays, but ultimately it boiled down to this concept of smoking was a symbol of, I guess you could say, the patriarchy, or of male dominance in society. And what smoking symbolized to women was a idea of men being in control over society in general, and that it was that's one of the reasons it was taboo. And so Freud got the idea from this guy that, hey, if we could put in this concept, right, of women's suffrage and link it to smoking, right, then you might be able to get more of those taboos to go away. So what Bernays did is he hired, I would say, he called them debutantes, and they were basically young, relatively attractive, well-dressed, relatively high a lot of connections, upper crust society type of ladies, who he basically paid them to go to the Easter Day Parade. I think it was in 1929. And he had them all pack some cigarettes into their clothing and join the Easter Day parade. And while they're on the Easter Day parade, they all simultaneously whipped out a cigarette and lit up, right? So the point is that that got a lot of media coverage, and they all started calling it basically the torches of freedom. So they were linking, right, the right to vote with cigarettes, right, and smoking. And so it transitioned this idea of that it's just a pastime that's fun for just someone that enjoys smoking, right, or they like the experience, whatever. They transitioned from that to going, if you want to make a statement about the patriarchy or women's suffrage or just wanting to have more freedom, well, then guess what? You now have a way to express that through a product. Well, Lucky Strikes sure got a good return on investment on this one. Their sales went up, and this is just one of the projects that Bernays was involved in, where he was subtly trying to manipulate the market and tie it to something else, whether it was with weight loss, or changing concepts of fashion so that cigarette boxes fit better with whatever women were wearing at the time. There's a whole, it's a whole thing. So I'm not going to get into deeply into those. Another one that I think that is important for you guys to know about, of the breakfast you eat every day, right? It's not something I think you'd be thinking. I was surprising me when I looked at this guy. The concept of a hearty breakfast with bacon, eggs, and everything else was pretty much started by Bernays. Well, how did that happen? Well, he got approached by this company called the Beech Nut Packing Company, and they, amongst other things, they sold bacon, right? And they were noticing that they weren't getting a lot of sales in bacon. And they were struggling in that respect. So they approached him and say, hey, how can we appropriately, do your work and see if we can get some more sales here. So what he did is he took the slant of using, I would say, authority figures, right? He went to a doctor, right? He asked the doctor and went like, hey, what is more healthy? Is it a hearty breakfast with bacon, eggs, whatever else, coffee, orange juice, or is it more healthy to eat that in the beginning of the day, or is it more healthy what was more common back in the day, which was orange juice, coffee, and maybe a roll before you kind of get started with your day? And the doctor was like, well, generally it's probably better to have more calories in the morning. You're breaking your fast from the night before, and you're going to be burning a lot of calories in the day. It's probably better to have more in the morning. And so can you write other doctors about this? And specifically, he asked him to write like 5,000 other doctors, just asking this exact same question. 4,500 of those doctors that were surveyed wrote back and basically said, well, all things being equal, generally it's probably better to have a more hearty breakfast, right? And basically published this finding along with the very easy, slipping in the idea that bacon is a really good addition to a hearty breakfast, right? And the sales for bacon went up, right? And this is something that has continued through the rest of this day. Like all of us fat Americans, right? We can't think of a breakfast without bacon. We can't think of breakfast without bacon, eggs, and waffles, and whatever else, right? So that's something that's affected all of us at this point. It's a normal cultural thing. What is the main point of all these little stories here? Bernays, he transformed, like him and his type of people, transformed how our culture views products, right? Now again, let's go back to the bacon and eggs and the cigarette situation. Can you vote and not be a smoker as a woman? Yeah. Can you be a relatively healthy person and not eat a heavy breakfast? I mean, me personally, I don't even eat breakfast anymore, but point is, there's no connection in a basic sense, right, between voting rights and cigarettes. But he was able to sit there and change the narrative so that if you want to be healthy and if you want to be a woman that votes, these are ways of expressing yourself, right? Expressing the way you want to be seen by the world, right? And it goes from a needs to a wants economy, right? I want this because I want this to be said about me, instead of, hey, bacon's actually, it's a high calorie thing, I would like to eat it, and the thing is, the bacon was already there, cigarettes were already there, but it's how he manipulated the people to see it in a different light, right? He could take a product with no real connection, right, and manipulate your basic emotions and your basic drives as a human being and get you to go along the route that he wants, right? Now we can see how this all has evolved. This was relatively early on, right? It's almost 100 years ago. How has this evolved, right? Well, can you imagine being told that you should buy a vehicle, right, with, whatever marketing strategy they have, but generally, in this day and age, have you ever seen a vehicle commercial of some sort that doesn't have some sort of aspect of pushing you toward adventure or family time or connection to patriotic sentiments, like Coke, right? They'll sit there and it's just a fizzy drink, dude. That's all it is. It tastes okay, it tastes pretty good. That's what they're selling, but they're saying, okay, if you're thirsty, it's probably a good way to go, which it's not. They'll sit there and like, oh, you want to have friends? Well, maybe you have a Coke with somebody. Like there's these whole things that come along with these, the things. And then we don't even want to talk about, 2020 and the whole controversy around the pharmaceutical companies, right? That was a whole PR nightmare for those people. But I think it kind of opened the can of worms for most of us. But now that I've kind of told this story and kind of brought this idea to you guys, I want to explore a few ideas that I'm sure is kind of on your mind at the moment. One, is marketing in and of itself a bad thing? I wouldn't say it is. You can be a genuinely good person that's trying to sell a product and you want people to know you have it, right? I'm not saying, in this video that marketing is a bad thing per se, right? It's just that I think it's very clear that it's not always the best for you, and someone is going to try and push their idea of what a good breakfast is for you, right? And you can fill in the blank, good vehicle, relationship status, or whatever, right? And this is where you kind of go into the idea of, is manipulation in and of itself a bad thing? And I kind of wrestled with this idea for a bit here, and I can't say that manipulation in and of itself, even though it has a bad connotation, it's usually a negative connotation, it is not in and of itself a bad thing. What do I mean by that? Well, in the context of, like, say, Lucky Strikes and the smoking, probably not. Those women were probably just fine without smoking, right? There's so many situations where all of us have been influenced by something or another through social media or other people or whatever, marketing. There's negative and positive. It's giving you a marketplace. And are all those products good for you? Are all those ideas good for you? No. But are they all bad? Not really. I mean, the way I like to think about it is, again, what Bernays and his type were trying to wrestle with and I don't think in a very healthy way, but what they were wrestling with is that we're living in a world of billions instead of millions or hundreds of thousands, and how our brains are wired as humans is we're supposed to be kind of living in a village of maybe 100 people. Like, at the end of the day, humans are not designed to deal with billions of other people at all times. And the biggest thing that he was, again, they were sitting there trying to cope with this concept that we have masses of people that they're trying to do one thing or another with, whether it was with war or peace, right? So, I mean, I sit there and I look at, like, say, a tribal environment where it's, maybe 100 people, and you go, well, is manipulation technically a bad thing in that context? Well, not really. It depends, right? It depends on the leader. It depends on the parents. It depends on the people involved, right? Can you be manipulated by people in a smaller environment? Well, of course. Can it be negative? Yes. But it can also be a good thing. What does that mean? Well, let's just say you're sitting there and you're, in this example of a village of some sort. You realize that there's a certain area of, let's say, a part of the woods that has lots of predators in it. Well, what do parents do? Well, they tell stories about kids who disobey their parents and bad things that happen to them. Now, is that manipulation? Yeah. Is that probably one of the reasons that a lot of kids, a lot of us are alive today? Probably, right? They go, okay, that part of the woods is dangerous. My dad told me about it. He manipulated me in this way. Maybe I shouldn't go in that woods as a little 5-year-old kid, right? Is that a negative thing? No, I don't think so. In the same way, like a tribal chief of some sort is trying to sit there and deal with, say, famine or, resources drying up or whatever, and he's trying to get his people to think, you probably need to move, right? There's some of these negative things coming in, and we're dealing with this real life scenario, and as a leader, he's having to make these hard decisions. What does he do? Well, he has to kind of manipulate them. He has to tell them true, whether it's straight up just telling them everything, or, telling some things to some people so that this tribe survives. Is that always a good thing? No. But is it always a bad thing? I mean, if that means that your tribe survives, then maybe, depends on the situation. There's some nuance to this, guys. And again, it can be very dangerous in certain situations. And I think what I'm trying to do is to invite you into a thought process, of a mind exercise to go, okay, what is this? How do I fit this concept into my life here? So I would like to kind of explore some principles and thoughts that I have that may help us respond to the world that Bernays created. And what comes to mind for me when I was looking through my script and researching this topic, it reminded me of a podcast by Jocko Willink. It's called the Jocko Podcast. It's specifically number 369 and 370. It's where he kind of discusses a game, the concept of a game. And I'm going to paraphrase heavily here, but basically the idea is that, every activity we do kind of comes down to like a game, right? And you start thinking about it, you go, okay, if I'm trying to do any type of activity, there's a way to win, right? To do a job right? Do activity correctly. There's not a way to do it, a way to lose, right? And then there's there's usually an activity or a technique associated with it to get what you want, right? It's not game theory or anything like that, but the point is that when you have a game, right? When you have a game that you are trying to play, right? Say it's checkers or chess or or just working a job, right? There's always something going on in the background. And usually the people that win the most games, right, they usually play a game that the other person doesn't know that they're participating in. So that's like one of the best ways to actually not be manipulated, right, is to know that there's a game happening and there's potential pitfalls that happen through your interaction with another human being, right? And again, it's just like everything. Like, you know, you sit there with, say, pool, right? If you deal with I've never dealt with a pool shark, but I've heard stories where, you know, they sit there and set you up with with the idea like, hey, let's bet a few bucks for this game. You're like, okay, whatever. And then he plays very badly. And you go, oh, okay, well, I can make a buck. And the guy says, no, let's do it again, double up, you know. And then you go on, and ultimately he's a really good pool player, and then completely wipes the floor with you at the last game where the money that you actually care how much money you lose at that point, right? So he's playing a game that you don't know you're playing, right? And he won. And that's something that that's kind of a thought process that's been going on with this for me. And so this kind of leads into my the first principle, I guess, that we can kind of apply to this issue or this world that Bernays created, that we need to accept the fact that we're going to be manipulated, right? It's not matter if, it's when. And the only thing that we can fully control is who and what is manipulating us and how much. The second principle that is building off of this. Now, just bear with me. It seems a little bit philosophical, but I think it needs to be said because it has real world applications here. We need to have and build a realistic and robust worldview on life and how we interact with human beings. Answering the big questions, right? Where do we come from? The best we can. Where do we come from? You know, who are we, right? What are we, you know, what are we designed to do, you know? And for a lot of people is what's going to happen after we die, right? These are basic worldview concepts that I think if you don't have a reasonable and decent grasp on this in your life, you're going to have a much higher chance of other people bringing their worldviews and manipulating you. And that's where it's one of those things. You have to give some of your time and energy to building a worldview that makes the most sense, that is reflecting the reality of the world you see and deal with and interact with at all times. You know, what is the, you know, who, you know, what is the character of humans, right? Are we all basically good, or are we all basically bad? Or are we a mixture of the both? Like, all of those things you kind of have to wrestle with, and you have to kind of look at two different arguments and have an internal debate and listen to debates on, you know, and if you don't make it a priority to build a worldview, you're going to be a lot more susceptible to people like Bernays. Once you kind of develop that over time, you're going to have to kind of take it to the next step, right? Is, again, that concept of the game, right? You're trying to, we have activities that we're doing in the long run, activities we're doing in the short run, and those are all, you know, in Jocko's words, games, right? Well, you want to order your life to win the games, both big and small, that you know are best for you to play, right? And, you know, it's a good basic idea. Like, if I really want to become a good chess player, I need to stop going to places, you know, a checkers club, right? if you're interested in checkers, you shouldn't be playing in a chess club, right? It's just basic concepts here. If you're wanting to be a very good athlete at a specific game, well, then guess what? You're letting go. You're putting boundaries on your time and your energy and your attention, right, to win the game that you're trying to play, right? And we all have perfect examples of that, right? If you're going to be really good at basketball, guess what? You're not playing football half of your time, or even at all, right? And so to kind of bring that down to kind of a realistic, like what works for me, and again, this is not to, I don't want to be preaching here for those of you who don't follow Jesus, but this is something that has really helped me in after wrestling through a lot of years of kind of trying to build my worldview and have a robust one. I've landed on this currently, and it has served me very well for a good amount of time. But this is a verse from a set of verses from the Bible, from Matthew 22:34 through 39. And if you're not a Christian, please just bear with me. The point I'm trying to make is just giving you an example of what's helped me get through and process these the games that I may or may not want to play, right? So it basically says that, but when the Pharisees heard that he had silenced the Sadducees, these are all the very learned people back in the time that Jesus was around, people that knew their Bible, the Old Testament, very, very well. And you have people like a lawyer, they straight up ask him a question. He says, "Teacher, what is the great commandment in the law?" And he said to him, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the great and first commandment. And the second is like to it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments depend all the law and the prophets." So, a few things to unpack this. He's basically distilling all of, if you have any experience with the Bible at all, the Old Testament has so many laws, right? It was in the original founding of the people of Israel. They were building basically a society off of these laws, so it was pretty extensive, right? And it was all centered around ultimately following God. But what Jesus did right there is he sat there and went, "I'm distilling down all of that stuff, all of those laws, all of those different arguments to these two things. You love God with everything you have, and make him the first priority. Second one is to love your neighbor as yourself." Right? What does the word love mean? It's, again, the American, or not even American, just the English word for love is not very helpful I would say, in just normal day-to-day life. You can say you love your dog and you love pizza. Is that the same thing? No. You love your child and you love a vehicle. Very different thing. It's an inch deep and a mile wide. What the root word for this was agape, the word for love. And in this context, it's basically saying that I think a lot of parents can understand this a little bit better, but you can understand it whether or not you have a kid or not. But we all have had that experience, if you've been parented or are parenting, if you had a good person in your life that was older and they're doing things for your own good, whether or not you like it or not at certain points, they have your well-being at heart. And with every decision they try and make, they're trying to do the best thing they can for you. That motivation is called agape, right? That desire to do what's best for you, no matter how you may feel about that person at a certain point. In the same way as, like, I want to take care of myself, right? And this is where it kind of comes back into this duality, which is very interesting in the second commandment, right? I need to love someone like I love myself. Well, that also means I need to love myself. I need to take care of myself in the same way that I would take care of my child. Not in the exact actions. I don't need a diaper change, right? However, the point is that we have a way of looking at the world that if something is hurtful or negative for that person, and it would be for me, well, then why would I do it, right? And so this helps me kind of figure out what game I'm playing at. Again, this is my 30,000 foot view out of every other small game I'm playing, right? Whether it's this, whether it's my, parenting my children, projects around the house, like whatever it may be, jobs, right? I'm ordering it now that I have a basic worldview. I'm ordering it like, does this make it so that I love God with everything I have? And ultimately, is it making so I'm loving people like I love myself? And if the answer is no, well, then maybe I shouldn't do it, right? And so this is where it goes into my last point here. My point or principle, it's basically just boundaries, right? If you're going to be good at anything or try and do anything in life and win at any game, you have to say no to certain stuff. So when it comes to technology in general, we need to respect how our technology and social media and how powerful it is in our life, and to make sure that we figure out what is the most dominant thing in our life, right? For me, I like to kind of think of it kind of let's kind of have I'll get on my soapbox a little bit here, but back in the day, right? You lived in your own house. Let's say you lived in a village. If I wanted to go get anything or do anything outside of my house, I had to, you generally have to put your clothes on, put your shoes on, go out your front door, and you go into a public square of some sort, right? That's where you're going to have good and bad merchants that are trying to sell you good and bad things. That's where you're going to have, churches. That's where you're going to have, a red light district. You're going to have a whole bunch of different, aspects of humanity all mixed into this area. And ultimately, like, if you're feeling off or you're out of, you're not very healthy that day, or you're just kind of in a bad mood, sometimes it wasn't the best option to go to that main town square, right? If you were not thinking clearly, so you could be manipulated by somebody. You could sit there and have a thing. You can see where I'm going with this here. So that town square is here now, right? Yes, you can physically go some places and go to fairs and different things like that. I'm not saying our IRL life is not there anymore, but the point is that the world can come to you through this. And when you are treating it like it's just another thing in your life, like a shoe, well, then you're going to probably run into some problems, right? I need to respect the power this thing gives me, and I respect the power it gives others to affect me. That's pretty much what I want to say. Is like, figure out first, respect it, and then find boundaries around this world of social media. And everybody's talking about brain rot now. This is it, dude. Like, this is it. The easy access to the public square is what's messing with you. You can sit there and listen to some crazy guy on the corner, and he could be, in real life, right? But you would physically have to go out there and listen to him. Now you just have to put a few buttons, and now you're listening to somebody that probably doesn't even care about you, right? Or is trying to sell you something that you don't need, or impress people you don't care about, right? So, there's some practical things. Maybe you need to worry, for me, I'm kind of debating whether or not if I want to get like a dumb phone, right? Just a basic flip phone that has a hotspot that connects to my more smartphone when I need it, right? But it still gives me a basic access to people for emergencies and stuff like that, and GPS. Or you can get something like what they call the Brick or the Bloom product, where, and I'm not sponsored or anything, I'm just putting it as a point here, is that, you know, it locks certain apps until you physically bring something and make your phone scan it, right? Like maybe that's something that helps you win the games you're trying to go for, right? You know, finding times where you disconnect, whether it's every day or maybe once a week, right? Where you put your phone in a safe or you lock it or whatever, and then you're just in real life at all times, right? Maybe that's something that's going to help you become who you need to be to win the game that you're trying to win. So that's pretty much the main point here. I hope that you all take this for what it is, and I'm just another dude on the internet, so don't take everything, you know, at face value. Do your own research, but I hope this helps you have a little bit of perspective, but also have a few more tools in your toolbox that can help you function the way you need to. Take care of yourselves, take care of those around you, and I'd say if you can, disconnect a little bit, maybe today, from the internet, touch some grass, kind of think about what's the most important thing for you to get better as a person, and do something positive today that makes the world a better place because you were in it. See you later.